Elias Hart's last stand, the fight to reclaim kin from Comanche hands in 1871. A wall of dust and war cries swallowed the Texas plains as Elias Hart's world shattered in seconds. His wife, Abigail, screamed his name as Comanche raiders tore through their homestead, her voice drowned by the crack of rifles and the thud of hooves. Their two boys, barely old enough to hold a shovel, vanished into the chaos. Elias, caught half a mile off fixing a fence, had only a split-second choice: run for safety or charge into the storm to save them. What comes next is a tale of grit and heartbreak that'll stick with you. This isn't just history, it's a fight for family you won't forget. Subscribe to Plains Echoes and Survival Tales to hear how it ends. The afternoon had been quiet, the kind of still heat that blankets the Texas panhandle in late spring. May 18, 1871, started like any other day for the Hart family. Settled along the Pease River, a modest cabin. A few cattle, a patch of corn starting to sprout. Elias was out mending a fence line, hammer in hand, when the first shouts hit him like a thunderclap. He dropped everything, squinting across the flatland. A cloud of dust boiled up near the house, pierced by flashes of movement horses, dozens of them, riders leaning low. Then he heard Abigail, her voice sharp, desperate, cutting through the racket. Elias, the boys. His heart slammed into his ribs as he saw her silhouette stumble out the door, one arm reaching back, the other clutching a kitchen knife. Two small figures, Jacob and Samuel, 7 and 9, darted behind her before a wall of riders swallowed them whole. Elias didn't have a rifle on him, just a pistol strapped to his hip, half-loaded from a morning target shot. He'd left the Winchester propped by the cabin door, figuring a quiet day didn't call for it. Now, staring at the swarm later pegged at 50 Comanche warriors, he knew he was a fool for that. The air filled with smoke, and the high, keening war yells that froze settlers' blood across Texas. He saw a neighbor, Jim Grayson, sprinting from his own shack nearby, only to catch an arrow in the chest and crumple like a rag doll. The raiders moved fast, torching Grayson's barn, snatching his horse and circling back toward Elias's place. His gut screamed to run in, to fight, but his head held him back. 50 against 1 wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. He ducked behind a scrub oak, breath ragged, watching the chaos unfold. Abigail fought like a cornered bobcat, slashing at a warrior's arm with that knife, before a second grabbed her from behind, wrenching her wrists. Jacob's red shirt flashed as he kicked and swung, a tiny fist landing on a horse's flank before he was yanked up. Samuel went limp, scooped off the ground like a sack of grain. Elias's hands shook, his pistol useless at this range. He could have emptied it, maybe dropped one or two, but then what? They'd ride off with his family, or leave him dead in the dirt. No one left to chase them. "I'm coming for you," he growled under his breath, eyes locked on Abigail's fading shape as the raiders wheeled south. He'd heard the stories at trading posts. Comanche didn't always kill captives outright. Women and kids, especially, might live, taken for ransom or adopted into the tribe. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a lifeline. Elias had bartered with Kiowa traders once, swapping a colt for blankets. He knew the game. If he could stay alive, he'd find a way to track them, bargain, steal them back if it came to it. But first, he had to move. He bolted low across the open ground, dodging a stray arrow that buzzed past his ear. The homestead shrank behind him as he hit a dry creek bed, dropping into it like a hunted deer. Dust coated his throat, the tang of sagebrush sharp in his nose. He crouched there, waiting as the war cries faded into the wind, the raiders vanishing toward the horizon with his whole world in tow. The attack wasn't random. The Comanche had been hitting hard. That spring, some say it was revenge for the Salt Creek massacre a week earlier, where Texas militia gunned down 15 of their kin. Others point to settlers crowding the plains, grazing cattle over buffalo paths. Whatever sparked it, the raid on Pease River left 3 homesteads burning, 5 men dead, and 7 captives gone. Abigail, the boys, and Grayson's wife and daughters among them. Elias didn't know the numbers, then just the hole where his life used to be. He clung to one scrap of hope. Captives turned up alive sometimes. In 1870, a rancher near Fort Sill bought back his sister for 6 ponies and a rifle. If they kept Abigail and the boys breathing, he had a shot. Night fell fast, the plains stretching black and endless. Elias crept out of the creek bed, ears straining for hoofbeats. A coyote yipped in the distance, but no warriors circled back. He doubled around to the homestead, stepping over Grayson's body, eyes wide open. An arrow shaft snapped off in his ribs. The cabin still stood, door hanging loose, insides gutted. Flour sacks were slashed, a chair busted. Abigail's sewing box tipped over with thread spooling across the floor. He grabbed the Winchester from its spot, untouched, and a sack of jerky from the shelf. Then he saw Samuel's whittled stick horse, lying in the dirt outside. He picked it up, knuckles white, and tucked it into his belt. "I'll find you," he said again, voice breaking. Elias didn't sleep. He moved south by starlight, following the churned-up trail. The raiders left hoofprints deep in the soft earth, a broken feather here, a scrap of cloth there. He wasn't a tracker by trade, but he'd hunted these plains enough to read signs. The Comanche were headed for the Llano Estacado, a high tableland where they could vanish into canyons and scrub. He figured 50 warriors meant a big camp, maybe 200 total, with women and kids too many to fight, but not to shadow. His plan was rough: trail them, watch, wait for a chance. If they stopped, he'd scout for help, rangers, traders, anyone with guns or goods to trade. Dawn broke over the flats, painting the sky blood red. Elias was 10 miles out when he heard a low rumble, then a sharp yelp. He dropped flat behind a rise, peering over. 3 Comanche riders, stragglers from the raid, were dragging a calf they'd roped, laughing as it bawled. They hadn't seen him, but they were close, too close. His hand hovered over the pistol, then slid to the rifle. One shot could drop a man, but the sound would carry. He let them pass, holding his breath as their shadows stretched long across the dirt. They rode off, oblivious, leaving him alone again with the wind and that trail. He pushed on, legs aching, the sun climbing high. By noon, he stumbled on a bigger, find a trampled patch where the raiders had paused. Horse dung steamed fresh, and there, in the dust, was a shred of Abigail's apron, blue checkered, torn off in a struggle. He clutched it, throat tight, then stuffed it into his pocket. They weren't far, maybe hours ahead. He drank from a muddy seep, the water bitter, and kept moving. The plains were merciless rattlesnakes, coiled in the grass, heat baking the ground, but he'd grown up here, tough as the land itself. Every step was a vow: he'd get them back or die out there trying. Elias caught up near dusk, 20 miles from the homestead, where the trail dipped into a shallow draw. He crouched behind a boulder, peering down. The Comanche camp sprawled below, tents of buffalo hide, fires flickering, horses tethered in a tight line. He counted heads, 50 warriors, sure, but more besides women cooking, kids running between the lodges. Then he saw them. Abigail sat near a fire, wrists bound, her face bruised but jaw set hard. Jacob and Samuel huddled close, alive, dirt-streaked but moving. A warrior barked something, shoving them toward a tent. Elias's chest burned relief, rage, all at once. They were there, breathing, but guarded tight. He couldn't storm. 50 rifles would cut him down before he crossed half the distance. But he wasn't done. He'd heard Texas Rangers were patrolling near Fort Griffin, 60 miles east. If he could reach them, bring them back, he might have a chance. Or he could wait, shadow the camp, look for a break, someone slipping off, a trade opening up. Historical records back this. Comanche raids in '71 took dozens of captives, some freed later for cash or horses. Elias didn't know that then just the fire in his gut and the trail at his feet. He settled in, rifle across his knees, watching the camp glow against the darkening sky. One step, then another, he'd claw his family back from the edge, no matter how long it took. It's a raw fight, and Elias isn't out of the woods yet.